What is kidnapping? How does the California Penal Code define it? And if you're facing this type of charge, how do you defend it? Well, we're going to answer those questions in this video. Hi everyone, Attorney Joey Peak with Virtuoso Criminal and DUI Lawyers here. Today I'm going to talk to you about California's kidnapping statute. Kidnapping is criminalized in California Penal Code Section 207. And like many other sections of the Penal Code, there are lots of other subsections to it. In this video, I'm just going to cover California Penal Code 207 subsection A, often referred to as simple kidnapping. As you may know from your own research, there are other versions of kidnapping that are also punished under Penal Code Section 207, but I'm going to start things off by just talking about the simple kidnapping law, and I think that'll help us better understand what people often consider the aggravated versions of kidnapping. I'll talk about some common defenses to a kidnapping charge later on in this video, but first, let me talk to you about the elements of the offense. What does the DA actually have to prove in order to make a kidnapping charge stick against you? So to prove kidnapping, the DA has to prove first that you, the defendant, used force or fear to detain or hold somebody else. And then in doing so, you cause that person to be moved, what is called a substantial distance, and that the victim did not otherwise consent to the movement. So let's think about these different elements together. What is a substantial distance? It has to be more than just a slight or trivial distance. If you simply move somebody, just a small amount, that's probably a good argument that maybe you're guilty of something else like false imprisonment or assault or battery, but it may not necessarily arise to the level of kidnapping. At the same time, the definition of substantial movement it could still be very broadly defined. There are some even potentially small distances which could count as a substantial distance under the statute. Is somebody perhaps being forced against their will from one room of a building to another? That could cause a kidnapping charge, depending on the other facts of the case. Let's talk about the consent issue. Sometimes the alleged victim may consensually agree to go along with the defendant for a certain journey, but then all of a sudden the complaining witness alleges that the defendant was suddenly detaining them against their will, that perhaps they got in the car initially as part of an agreement to go on a trip, but then somehow something turned bad and then the defendant wouldn't let them leave and they changed plans and they're holding them in the car against their will. These are all sorts of scenarios the kidnapping law can potentially entertain. And a good defense attorney has to be aware about these hypotheticals when exploring the parameters of the law and seeing if this charge can stick against their client. One thing that's also important is any alleged movement to make that substantial distance element, any alleged movement by force has to be more than what is incidental to the commission of other offenses. So, for example, in some situations where one person is assaulting another person within a building and perhaps dragging them from one room to another in the same building. Well, there might be an argument that if that distance wasn't otherwise all that great and it's in the same building, a judge or a jury might determine that's merely incidental to the crime of assault that's otherwise going on, and it's inherent in another charge that's already being brought. These are things that the California jury instructions and case law bring to light. Do you have a robbery charge against you where you're accused of commanding the victims to perhaps remain in a certain place for a certain period of time? Is that merely incidental to the robbery that's already committed? Leaving aside the issue of whether you've been properly identified as one of the robbers, this other legal issue that's unique to the kidnapping charge has to be addressed. And as the issue of consent, there are some scenarios where the alleged victim did not actually consent to the movement, but maybe the defendant reasonably believed that there did. Go back to the the road trip hypothetical that I just mentioned. In that scenario, you can imagine situations where there's a communication breakdown between the alleged victim and the defendant, where the alleged victim might have had a change of heart during the journey and didn't want to keep going on, but the defendant in that case may reasonably believe, hey, I'm not doing anything wrong. This person agreed to come along with me, and I'm still acting within the scope of my consent. But remember, The consent has a certain scope, okay? Consent to go along for one part of the journey does not necessarily automatically translate to consent to be moved around against your will all the time. So the jury instructions also make it clear that any consent by the alleged victim can be withdrawn at any time. Put simply, I hope I'm conveying to anybody watching this video that the crime of kidnapping in California is one that is very interesting in sort of how sort of technical it can become. I mean, like many other charges, we often think of kidnapping as only criminalizing a certain type of, very specific type of conduct where somebody just bursts into the room and just takes somebody against their will, drags them across the country. Obviously, that counts as kidnapping. You can imagine all the elements I just described being met in that hypothetical. But there are lots of other scenarios where the crime of kidnapping could be thought of as covering. And so if you have a criminal case where that charge is being lodged against you, that charge requires a particularly different type of very careful and technical legal analysis to determine if that charge should even stick. The crime of kidnapping is a very serious charge. It can carry up to 8 years in state prison if you're convicted, just on the simple kidnapping charge. We haven't gotten to the more serious versions yet. So keep these things in mind if you're facing a kidnapping charge in California, and be sure to contact qualified counsel before going into court and preparing a defense for that matter. For more videos like this, feel free to check out our YouTube channel and our Instagram page anytime. Feel free to give us a call for a free consultation if you need help. Thanks, and stay safe out there.